My name is Mitch Guthrie, and this is the Long Letter Podcast. My guest on this episode is Cole Meckle. And Cole is the pastor of Gather Church. And I invited him on the podcast so that he could talk about the programs that Gather Church offers, as well as kind of look back at the past year to see what sort of things have been accomplished, what sort of things have been done. He shared this in the church service a few weeks ago, and I thought it'd be valuable for readers of the podcast to hear what one church is doing across all these different areas. And so I invited Cole onto this podcast to talk about that. And what I didn't really think about was the fact that I've known Cole for about 10 years now. We're pretty close friends. And in those 10 years, I don't think Cole and I have ever actually ended a conversation. We have a tendency to just branch from one conversation to the next. And if I had thought about that, I might have realized earlier that inviting him to, try to fit everything that we talk about in 1 hour was a fool's errand. Anyways, and so we ended up talking. We ended up at monster conversation. And so I'm going to try to split this into 2 episodes and make some edits of stuff where we kind of maybe get off on tangents or things that aren't directly related to the subject at hand. And so anyways, thank you for your patience, and just like to thank Cole for being on the show. And yeah, as you're listening, you might hear some transitions or whatever that aren't quite as smooth. And that's just basically because I'm trying to cut this down for time and fit this into 2 episodes. I want to thank Allyson Arras, who is kind of assists on the podcast. It was a long night. We had a camera fail again because I seem to always have cameras that fail. We had some heating issues, so the room that we were in ended up getting really warm, all sorts of stuff. It was kind of a long haul. By the time we get to the end of the podcast, you'll hear that we're all kind of maxed out. So we probably overdid it, but there was a lot of good stuff in there. So I tried to capture as much of that as I could. I've edited it. I put it into this episode, and there will be another episode. And anyways, go ahead and listen. Thank you for your patience. Anyways, so this podcast is a little different in interview wise, but a few weeks ago, I guess it was now, a week or 2 ago, you gave kind of the State of the Union of Gather that we normally do at the end of the year. It's been missing a couple of years in there with, I think, just the situation with COVID and just how things were scheduled. So it was good to hear it come back this year. And just to kind of set the stage for it, it's not something, it's less about bragging rights, this is all that we did. So much as, man, there's a need that needs to be met, and just listen to how much has been done, sort of thing. Kind of a reminder of the mission, I guess, and it is good to look back and realize, because I'm sure you have days where you're like, why do we do this? What? You're just tired, or is this worth it? And then you can look back and go, man, we've really it's worth it.
Yeah. It's a real mix of things and emotions and thoughts when we're pouring over information and stats and numbers to put this together. I mean, on one hand, it's a little tragic when you start looking at how many people are struggling with food insecurity. It's wonderful to be able to meet that need, but it's tragic to recognize how many people are dealing with food insecurity.
That you have to meet that need, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's also kind of a recognition that it's not just a Gather thing. I mean, there's a whole network of volunteers and other organizations. This isn't just, Gather by itself. This is, multiple churches, multiple people, multiple volunteers, all,
from all walks of life to, we have folks that are not, they're not confessing Christians. We have folks from different faiths. We have folks just in general from the community that are just simply motivated to figure out what's going on in the community. And it really is beautiful that way. I mean, Gather has always been a place where we're trying to collect up a bunch of people with a bunch of diversity and share life together and learn from one another and grow together in one another. And of course, do that. And we do that as those of Gather Church, as folks who are in following Christ. But it's just bringing a whole bunch of people together to learn from one another, to love one another, it's like, just speaking of like food box packing, it's just a incredible experience just to show up and even watch what goes on there. And
Right.
people from the community in general, people from drug court, people, we sometimes will have youth come in. We'll have a group of folks that come in that are, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they work with those on autism spectrum, and it's just amazing to watch all these different people that are serving, walking around this series of tables with boxes and filling boxes with
Right.
food. It really is a beautiful,
And the
beautiful
opportunity
situation.
exists. I mean, there's the truth is, most of this stuff doesn't get off the ground without people giving their time and volunteering. It's mostly volunteer led for a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
And I think people are like the diversity part of it. I think also kind of hints or shows that like this isn't something that Gather owns.
Mm-hmm.
Like we might facilitate this or that or whatever, but for the most part, these are things that just exist, that get picked up and run with.
Absolutely. Heck, I don't even know how this stuff all comes together week after week after week. Really, I mean, it's sometimes like, obviously there's a lot of organization, a lot of work that goes into it, but it primarily, especially when you're talking about food work, is the dedication of people that we know are going to show up. You know, it's there's no way to pull off all of it just with those that would say Gather Church is their home church or are part of our staff or whatever. It is just, again, this eclectic, diverse group of people that don't even necessarily like sign up. Oh yeah, next Thursday, I'm going to be one of the 12 people to pack food boxes. It's just that whoever is needed amazingly shows up. And yeah, there's people that show up week after week after week,
Right.
and they're there just faithfully all the time. But then there's the folks that they drop in here and there. They show up to drive boxes
And they've got
around
work
here
to
and
do.
there.
Like
Yeah, and there's always something to
it's
do.
kind of like a if you build it, they will come sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also, like, we've touched on this before in our conversations that, we see the church bigger than just a service that happens on a weekend so much. All these things, the clinic and the food bank and the cafe and stock box delivery, all that stuff, those are all sort of ministries of the church.
That's just church. To me, that's just church.
Right.
It's like the other 6 days. Well, technically, I'd probably say the other 6 days and 22 hours, right? It's the life of the church. It's the life of, I guess, if you're wanting to define church, I think more appropriately is the body of Christ, as groups of people who are seeking to serve God and love their neighbor. It's that, people coming together and doing just that, right? So,
Yeah. And it's, like you said, there's diversity in that. There's people that, aren't a part of the church or aren't part of any church or anything like that. There's room for them in that process.
Mm-hmm.
There's room for them in the work. And so I think, like, if you were to show up at a service, you're only seeing sort of like the tip of the iceberg of what actually all the machinations that go on throughout the week.
Yep.
I come to the service to hear about what happened through the week because there's just always so much activity and so many moving pieces to keep hold of. And that's why I think, I wanted you to come to the podcast and share. I know you recorded this as the service thing, but I thought it would be cool to put it in a different format and people can hear, because there's a lot of people that are also looking for opportunities and ways to do stuff. They just hadn't thought of it.
Right.
They wouldn't think, oh, I could drive out to East Louis County, 1 day a week or something, or I could go do this, or I could, something where they can apply themselves. And people have different amounts of time and abilities that they can contribute. And there's like kind of a space all along that spectrum for people. You could be there, you could be together full time. You could be, show up 1 hour a week or something.
Yeah. I mean, we have, it's interesting. This isn't something on any of our data list here or our kind of numbers, but like we have a volunteer that shows up at the cafe, usually with one other person in the middle of the night to clean the bathrooms and other things that need to be cleaned. But their primary focus is on cleaning the restrooms that are connected with the cafe. I mean, nobody knows. And
they do it at night. They just, because that's the best time.
That's the best time to do it. There's nothing else going on. You don't have to be interrupted by anybody else. And they're volunteer. They come in and they clean the restrooms.
Which is, it sounds stupid. It's so critical.
Oh, huge.
To what we have going on, to cafe, to services like that. I mean, they're all needed and they get done one way or another, but it's nice that somebody does that.
And like one of those unsung, unknown, selfless givers, right? Like, and we have sparkling clean restrooms. They are pretty doggone clean, I'll tell you. Yeah.
No complaints. Well, that's awesome.
Sure.
I think that's great. So where do you want to start? Gather's got lots of moving pieces here.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's start talking about maybe the child care facility. It's one of those things that a lot of people know that we have a licensed child care, but it's not necessarily anything that gets press, right? Like it's just a child care. That's kind of a horrible thing to say, right?
Well,
just a child care.
Just child care.
Just a child care facility. I mean, it's,
But let's take that real quick.
Yeah.
The process of making that happen, of starting the child care.
Yeah.
I mean, there was just one thing after another in terms of like delays and whatever. So how long did it take from like kind of the idea to think about it to when it finally was like, let's go?
It was over 2 years.
It was a while
worth of effort. I mean, now some of that there was a few factors that slowed the process. And so when we were really close to licensure, we had an opportunity to assist another behavioral health agency coming into Lewis County. At the time, it was really clear there was really only one behavioral health agency in Lewis County, and there wasn't much choice, and they were at capacity. There was the need for another facility to come to town. We were experiencing that on a weekly basis, if not daily basis. And so we allowed them to rent our what was intended to be the child care facility. And that was supposed to initially be for like a few months, and it turned into about a year. So that did delay the process.
That pushes things out a bit. So we get this started, and so what do you got there? What do you got?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, when it comes to most everything Gather, we're trying to like fill gaps, and we're trying to say, okay, what does our community need? What do the powerless need? What do the voiceless need? What do the underprivileged need? What's going on? How can we serve our community? We don't want to just like do something because it sounds like a cool thing to do, right? It's nice when things sound cool, but at the same time, it's about like filling a need, taking care of people. We have to live out that aspect of our vision of caring for the vulnerable. And so the child care came out of the idea that we need to have more opportunity for care for kids who particularly are struggling. Maybe they've been in the foster system. They've got issues struggling with trauma. There's it's trauma-informed care. It's like a terminology that's out there nowadays. But there was need for more child care connected and with staff that were trauma-informed, so that they could
train specifically for this issue. And that would be like, that's related to like adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah, ACEs. So that's certainly one of those like measurement tools that you can use to determine kind of where somebody might fall and how much trauma they've experienced.
So it wasn't just a child care, like just, hey, drop your kid off. It's child care with a purpose for this sort of focus and training in the staff.
Yep. Yeah, trying to like have staff that are well equipped, trauma-informed, caring for those youth, those children that are, again, coming out of trauma contexts. We experienced and watched families have a hard time finding placements for their foster kids or for their kids when they return home, and other similar kind of struggles in that regard. And so we were like, we need something in our community where we're focused on that. And it's not by any means and like some unique thing, right? Like we're not inventing some amazingly cool new deal.
Right.
It's just
This
that we wanted to
exists in
make
other
sure.
ways.
Yeah, it does. And there's capacity at some centers that take care of kids with trauma experiences and the particular behaviors that they might exhibit. But again, we're like, there's a lack. We need more of that kind of thing going on in this community. And so that's kind of the reason that we started a childcare facility. Took some time to get off the ground. Here we are. We're rocking and rolling. It's been a while now. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Holly has shared some statistics with me that actually go back a little farther than just the last year. But so it's been 3.5 years that childcare has existed, and we've provided care for over 100 individual children over that 3.5 years. And 27 of those 100 kids have had open CPS cases. And so
it's over a quarter.
Yeah. Many times too, we're contacted by CPS because they're just having a hard time finding placements for childcare for those kids.
The training required doesn't exist in every childcare setting.
I mean, it is a particular skill, right? It's not just being aware that the children might have trauma, but there's like particular kinds of interventions for children who have experienced trauma, because how they're interpreting what's spoken to them is going to be different than a kid that hasn't had that same kind of trauma. Yeah. And so if a staff is trained and equipped for trauma-informed care, they can respond to a child in a way that doesn't, bring out the worst or a negative
or to be
response.
Aware of what they're doing and the response a kid may have to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's nice to have a mix, right? I wouldn't want to, by any means, if you walked in to Gather and Grow any day, you would witness a child care facility.
I guess next time we should lead with, it's called Gather and Grow.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't know any different walking into Gather and Grow than you would any other child care facility for the most part, as far as like the mix of kids and everything else. It's just a bunch of kids being kids, having a good time, learning, growing.
That's the trick with it, though, is these kids don't walk around with little signs on the back that say, I have a difficult, home experience or whatever. And thankfully, but at the same time, you walk in, it's going to look like, just kids. It's not like, that's great. So 27 that are some sort of involvement with the CPS process. Yeah. And out of 100 total that we've had. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right. And that's just that they've had an open case. Now it's a much larger number of kids that have had CPS involvement or dealing with some other struggle related to some adverse experience in their life or in their childhood. So out of those 27, at least 17 have been reunified with their parents. And of course that's the goal, right? Like kids thrive within with their parents. So obviously there's most times if CPS is involved, there's some things to overcome. But again, that's got to be the goal, is reunification. And so it's a beautiful thing that of those 27, 17 have been reunified. Many of those families have received other forms of assistance. So the bulk of that 17 have received some other assistance, some help, ranging from SUD services, substance use disorder services, to food services, to other counseling services, and some of the other things that we'll talk about later. So
they Gather also provides.
Yep. They've accessed some of those services at Gather, and it's nice that way. There's a lot of support and encouragement and trust that can be built across the family.
I suppose it's more holistic too. It's not like you're crossing a boundary into other organizations where scheduling or even just understanding of the situation changes. I mean, I'm sure you can't share everything, but at the same time, there is a more holistic approach to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So lots of other great things. We have an amazing team. Holly Renner is our child care director. And, she's, when it comes to child development and caring about kids, I've never experienced anybody like her before. It's pretty amazing when some of the families that she knew as students when she was a teacher are now parents that have their kids at Gathering Row too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, she's okay.
Amazing. Yeah,
like-
she's
all right.
She's aight.
She's all right.
Yeah,
I like
she's
her.
all right.
She's okay. I can't really make fun of her without her being here. It's not as
I
much
know
fun.
it feels kind of wrong, doesn't it? You know.
Oh,
So
we'll send her the video afterward. Okay.
and all the staff there, you know, Liz has been another person there with us at the childcare for a long time, and just one of the most dedicated people I've ever known. So she's fabulous too. And anyway, yeah,
You can go on. You
I
can
could name all of them,
yeah.
and yeah, and some that aren't with us anymore too. There's just a bunch of great people that for those of you who are listening who maybe don't have young kids or have never had kids in childcare before, what an amazing call on people's lives, and what an under-supported group of people, honestly. Like I would really wish that people would offer more support to those that do things like teach and raise our kids.
Well, and to do that,
childcare.
and then bam, you know, we had COVID hit, which if there's one thing that COVID revealed, regardless of where you stand on the whole issue, is that childcare is a critical and necessary component of how our entire society operates. And it's harder for those who are low income, who are, you know, single parent families or whatever. I mean, and so, yeah, that I imagine that I know for a fact the staff really had to get creative. And I mean, that's not just your normal day or a normal year, normal 2 years, whatever it was just a ton of work.
Oh, yeah. I mean, probably hardly, and maybe next to healthcare itself, that was more impacted was than childcare. Was just like so hard.
Yeah, I mean, just a huge thing. Well, that's great.
Yeah, it's beautiful stuff.
All right.
So let's see. Next, let's talk about Parents as Teachers. Another lesser known thing Gather does. Parents as Teachers is a parenting education program. It's a home visitation program. So we have a staff of teachers that connect with families, and they go into their home, observe their kids, observe the parents, and work with the parents to develop parenting skills. It's like, I don't know. It's one of those questions I'm going to have for God. It's like, why isn't that baby born with a manual? Like something, come on, give me a little more to go on. Cause all we got is what was given to us. Right. And some of what some of us got wasn't so great. No offense, mom and dad.
Right.
But like, there's always, right? Like there's always things. And even then, like what kind of learning is that? Cause you're a kid trying to pick up on the right way to raise a kid. And there's a lot of great information out there about what's helpful in the formation of kids and what are great tactics to take in parenting.
Well, and it's like, in one sense, you know, things are different than when, you know, our parents raised us, but also the same. Like there's this weird, you know, and I think of Brooke, who shared her story a while ago, having to relearn how to do stuff after, you know, her struggling with addiction and stuff like that. She had to learn all over again. These are things we take for granted. You know, she's talking like somebody had to tell me to take a shower.
Right.
So I would imagine that, you know, that's your own personal thing, having to work with children and understand, you know, how kids respond and how you should respond to kids and so on. So Parents as Teachers, and this is a program we kind of picked up or took over from. Yeah.
So for years and years, Parents as Teachers had been offered through Centralia College. So it's technically a program that is overseen by DCYF. And it is not a program that you have to be in trouble to get access to. Unfortunately, so many parenting programs out there that are free to people, you have to have been earmarked as a bad parent first. And then we'll give you some help, right? It's like cart before the horse, crazy stuff.
It's not preventative.
Right, yeah. So Parents as Teachers is one of those handful of programs that offers parenting instruction and support before you have a reason that's known to to the world that you need it. So it was offered through Centralia College, through DCYF, funded and contracted and overseen. And Centralia College was running that program for many years. They've just shifted the different kind of work that they do and education work that they do in the community. And we're going to not continue that contract. We've had connection with them, the parents, teachers, staff, and others there for a long time. They came to us and were interested in whether or not we would be interested in having that as part of our scope of work.
Administering the program.
Yep.
Sort of.
Yep.
Okay.
And, went through a process to apply for that and ended up getting that scope of work, and it's great. Yeah.
What's that look like for what we have here? Like we have staff dedicated to that.
Yeah, there are, let's see, it's 6 staff, 5 home visitors, and 1 person that does data and some other information like that, including a supervisor. And yeah, it's pretty neat. Many of the staff have been at that for a long period of time. One of the more recent staff is somebody that's worked for us in a different program for a time and has transitioned over to working for parents as teachers, and his name is Julian. Julian is an amazing individual and got a real heart and passion for people, has a ton of skill in all kinds of things, from data entry and analytics, and has a passion for that kind of stuff, but is extremely relatable, right? Sometimes 2 things that don't go so well together all the time.
What?
It's a thing, but we'll talk later.
That's offensive. That's offensive to us technically minded people. And Charles takes offense also.
There's a rare few out there that can, Anyway, but Julian is really great. He has a strong connection with the Hispanic community. And he's one of a just handful of parents as teachers staff statewide that's a guy, a dad. There's not that many dads that are parents as teachers staff. And so that's been, it's been great. I guess he describes it as like somewhat like royalty in every meeting he goes to, because he's like one of the handful of token guys in the whole room. And it's like, oh, it's the dad. Wow.
Like
anyway.
He's the center of the Venn diagram of all the things that they're
exactly.
looking for.
Right. Yeah, precisely. So yeah, great group of people there.
Very cool.
It's been lovely to have them as part of our team. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, what do we have up next?
So a program that we don't operate anymore, but we put the stats in here just because it was such a big part of the last year, but coordinated entry. So coordinated entry, just to describe it briefly, is a housing service, and it is, like, for lack of better terms, a clearinghouse for folks that are in need of housing support services and looking to find housing opportunities and different programs that they might qualify for. So let's say I was unhoused. I would, if I so chose, find whoever in my county was operating coordinated entry, and I would go and initially answer a couple of questions like, where did you stay last night, to determine whether or not I was, quote unquote, literally homeless. And that would mean that either I'm at potentially imminent risk of homelessness too. So if I walked in and I had like an eviction notice in my hand, or if I walked in and I said I was living in my car or outside or someplace unfit for human habitation, then I would qualify to be assessed for coordinated entry. Unfortunately, it's very odd, and people have a lot of questions about why it's this way, but if you are couch surfing or you're staying in a hotel and you're paying for it yourself, in most people's eyes, that person would be unhoused, but by these definitions, they're not. Yeah. So once a person, let's say they said, yep, I stayed in my car last night and I don't have a home to live in, they would then be assessed based on their vulnerability. And so technically it would be your vulnerability to death. And so how vulnerable are you as a person? And then how dangerous is the situation that you're in? So based on that vulnerability scale, you will be put onto a prioritization list. And off of that prioritization list, you'll also be, in addition to this, backing up a second, you'll also be qualified for different kinds of housing programs. So rapid rehousing, McKinney-Vento, different programs that are out there to offer you housing supports. Then you're put onto a prioritization list, and referrals are then sent out from there. So coordinated entry doesn't do any of the actual hands-on moving people into a facility. They would do the work of assessing people's eligibility
basically
for a program
them
that would, exactly. Yeah. And then triaging them, if you will.
Which sounds like a ton of work. I mean, just the litany of stuff you kind of rattled off there is seems like a kind of high bar to meet all the things on this matrix. Yeah. And then, so no wonder it needs somebody to... Yeah,
it's a real skill, big time, to even assess somebody. because there's so much potential for miscommunication, or if a person they don't understand well how to ask questions, you could evoke an answer that would be a fear response, or somebody's trying to feed you the answer that they think that you want to hear, but it might actually be the opposite of the answer that you want to hear, or that would potentially qualify them for a program.
To read into the situation.
Yeah. And so it is complicated in many ways, and it's a real skill. It's hard. I understand the process. I'm not critical of coordinated entry at all. It's a difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of skill. It's super important that it happens and happens well in a community. Just to give you an idea, over the last 2 years, we assessed 1,130 people, or households technically. So that number would, if there were 3 people in a household, it would just be one on that 11, 20, 29, 1130. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, those are all Lewis County residents, no duplication, but so people don't get assessed
more than once.
So 1,130 that were then, like, they answered the question, yes, I'm living in a place unfit for human habitation. I'm living in my car. I'm living outside. Or I have an eviction notice in my hand. And so, from there, I can't even begin to parse out from my data here the number of referrals that went out. So
right, and get them to coordinate their entry into this program, basically.
Right.
And I was just thinking that job's even more difficult if you consider the fact that you're working with somebody that probably doesn't have a phone, doesn't have connection to, a place or communication where you can go get them, right? So there's a certain amount of work effort needed just to maintain the lines of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. It was always our goal, and I didn't necessarily want to get into why we're not operating coordinated entry anymore. It was our choice. Just some certain things became politically charged, and it made it really difficult to do that work, not compromising other scopes of our work.
Which is already difficult. Like, the work's already difficult.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard. And so,
but that's not the end of that story for Gather, because there's other programs and services provided that we're able to put attention to.
As a matter of fact, and this is one of the hard parts with coordinated entry, is that we have that 1,130 people on a DP list, but not necessarily are there enough people to line up to walk with those individuals and journey with them to even do the process if they qualify for a voucher to get into housing. It doesn't do a lot of good if you don't have the skill to navigate the system in order to find housing that you could utilize a voucher for, or the program for, or whatever, right? And so that was a large part of our decision too, is that assessing people is fine, but we need to focus more of our attention on what do we do with those that we're finding that are just stuck on this list. It sucks to just be stuck on a list. Nobody wants to be on a list, right? I don't want to just be on a list and think there's nobody helping me.
In the meantime,
absolutely.
Even if they can't get through this program, they can be helped in other ways.
Absolutely. So on to that, it's a little out of order in how I presented this stuff a couple of weeks ago, but Foundational Community Supports is a program that we've added since we've stopped operating coordinated entry. Foundational Community Supports is technically a contract that we've had for a while, but we've never put it into use, unfortunately, and it really was a matter of staffing and finding the right people that are able to fulfill the obligations and the hopes and dreams of Foundational Community Supports. But some people know it more by supportive housing and supported employment. And so it would do that kind of let's help you find a place to live. It's work that we've done and do anyway, but this is just a more sustainable way to do it. So help you find a place, help you get moved into a place, help you offer you the supports and encouragement that you need when you've been unhoused for a time and you are now housed. We've talked about this before, but that's a hard transition for people to make. I know Brooke shared a little bit of that as well. Yeah. It's not just easy if you've not lived inside for a while to just suddenly find yourself inside. And what do you do now, right?
Yeah, there's almost like a deprogramming aspect to homelessness, or being, chronically unhoused, as they'll say, you know, and it's like, you don't just need the housing. You can't just throw somebody in a house. You also have to maybe give them some training, hold the hand. That's what the provisional supportive housing is for.
Yeah. And not everybody needs that on the same level, right? But many do. And if we don't want to just see people lose the housing they've got, we got to offer them that kind of support. And so this program allows us to do that. You know, looking back on it, it's definitely a mistake that I made was to not pursue with more tenacity getting FCS operational while having coordinated entry. If I had it to do all over again, there is no question in my mind I would do everything I could to have that program simultaneous with coordinated entry. So there are things that we've learned since operating it fully that I just was not aware of.
And they weren't mutually supportive of each other.
They really, and it's not that they aren't going to still be, right? Like the organization running coordinated entry we can still work with them to offer additional supports, but it would have been more ideal. But again, you know, I'll just own that. I don't make all the right decisions. We don't make all the right decisions as a team. But again, I really do wish that we would have. One of the parts of FCS is there's TAP funds available that help people with first and last and deposit. And it can be up to $5,000 for one individual the first time that they ever utilize the system. And that's oftentimes the big hang up for people. You know, they just, you know, even if you have some housing voucher and some support, not everybody does, but even if you do, oftentimes it's not enough, right? And so you need additional support. But then too, some people that are assessed for coordinated entry and end up on a DP list don't have any other things that qualify them for a voucher or any kind of financial support. So they might find a place to move into, but you know, they don't have the $5,000-6,000 it takes to move in.
Right.
Yeah. And so those are some of the things that we've learned since launching FCS that make me again wish that we would have started FCS more intently and intentionally and passionately previously. But here we are, and we're forging ahead and have had some pretty amazing outcomes already from FCS. I was gonna. There's a story here. Can I read this real quick? Is that all right?
Yeah. Let me interrupt just for 1 second though, because I do want to touch on something that you mentioned, which is this idea of learning as we go, sort of thing, or trying to I think some people might see the work that Gather does, and you know, naturally they'll maybe have a response to it. They don't like that, or they don't understand how that works, or whatever. There can be some heat, obviously, that comes down through some of these programs. You know, for our programs that Gather invests in and tries, they're typically data driven, and they're also backed by research and science of what works. Now, that's not, you know, some sealed, unbreakable knowledge. Things change. We learn more. We see how programs work or don't work. I think people also could understand that we Gather will rethink, rework, or redo something if that doesn't work, or if that's not the best way to do it, or if that's, you know, there's some organizations get into a thing and this is the way they've always done it, and they kind of just maintain that until it's just useless or whatever. Or there's a pride part of it that says, well, we used to do it this way, you know. And I think Gather has the mindset of trying to understand the best information that's available on these subjects from people that have studied it and done the research, and figure out how we can apply or work within those things. And if the research changes or shifts, or if we get different data because people and populations change, then we shift and change with that, you know? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, man, if we do enough stuff in life, we're going to get some things wrong. We can't be afraid to do things wrong, and we can't be afraid to make adjustments along the way.
Yeah. Well, and adjustments are built in, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's not some sort of like, you know, very rigid thing where, you know, we're open to trying to understand, to do things in better or newer ways or whatever that looks like. Now, at the same time, if we have good evidence and, you know, experience with certain programs that people are like, I don't like that at all. Well, make your case, bring your data or whatever.
Right. Let's talk, right?
But if it's just like, I don't like this sort of thing,
yeah,
that's hard to work with that because you're not really working in good faith.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So the story you want to read.
Yeah. So this was from anonymous FCS client. They wrote, I felt the longer I remained homeless, the more difficult it was going to be to return to the mainstream of society. I'm tired. Being homeless is destabilizing, demoralizing, and depressing. I've lost my base. Trying to function is impossible. Without housing, it's hard to focus. Constant obstacles, one thing after another. This barrier and that barrier has chipped away at my self-esteem, and my personality has disintegrated, scattered into who knows what. For months, maybe years, I've become scared, frustrated, angry, bitter, and distrustful. I'm always tired, overwhelmed. Little tasks I should be able to do became chores, and it's like having to climb a mountain you know you won't reach the top of. My depression zaps my energy. The stress has clouded my judgment. My community doesn't see me, and if they do, they only see me as a problem. I've had to grab at anything that looks like an opportunity and continued to get nowhere until recently when I got in contact with y'all at Gather. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for seeing me. And thank you for walking through this with me. I mean, there's several things about this that are worthy of note. One, like, I love that this so much breaks down stereotypes of what people think about as those that are unhoused, because this is really almost poetic.
And that they have the words to express that. You know, so many people wouldn't feel comfortable even trying to put that into writing.
Mm-hmm. But then the first thing that they're thanked for wasn't, thanks for finding me a house, or thanks for giving me something to eat, or thanks for giving me some clothes. Stuff. They said, thanks for loving me. Thank you for seeing me.
And that's the ministry part of it. I mean, not even the ministry part of it. I mean, there's so many things that I think people misunderstand about the work, that it's, that at the end of the day, it's about caring about people. Like the people that work at Gather here, they actually care. They're not some cog in a machine that's just like, well, this is my job. And then I, go, like, they're pretty passionate about what they do. And, that aspect of, like, there's nowhere in that program that says you need to love on somebody to fulfill the needs of and yet that person felt loved.
Right.
And it's so important.
It is, like, at the foundation, what we do is building relationships with people and getting to know them.
Yeah.
Building trust, building rapport, helping people. Like, it's got to be relational though, right?
Yeah. And I think it's that open door. People don't understand, like, well, why don't you just go grab them and do this? You know, and it's like,
how about if I grab you and help you do something, Mitch? Or anybody for that matter.
Well, things are most successful if people are involved in their decisions and the care of what they're going to do, I mean, and I see it in my kids. I don't want my kids to just do good. I want my kids to want to do good. There's a difference, and I think, when people finally make that decision, I need to get off the street, or I need to get clean, or I need to address my mental health issues, or I finally need to go talk to, whatever it is. Like the fact that there's this kind of long-suffering patience that Gather has for that, just to keep the door open, keep that bridge there, keep working those connections for the hope that someday, one day, maybe, this person will walk across that bridge, come in through that door, whatever it takes,
Yeah. I mean, even for positive things, when I think about this in relationship to raising children, like if I forced my boys to do even what they loved, they would resent me and come to hate even the good thing that I was forcing them to do. All of us want to know we can make free choices, as free as any of us are, I guess. But
and the success of that is important.
Yeah.
That we are a part of that decision, not
Yep.
you know.
But it's just a different way to help people make good choices, right?
Right.
It's like forcing them or shaming people. That's not effective.
Right.
But relating to people, knowing them and knowing that they trust you and come to trust your input, that's the stuff that helps people make different
the relational
choices.
part of it versus the economic,
100%.
just you know, crunching people through a machine. Well, that's very cool. That's a cool letter to receive, and I'm sure that keeps the people that are working these things motivated to.
It's pretty amazing. Like I say often, I should figure out a format to share this kind of stuff more, because it comes in a lot. It really, I don't even know what, that feels weird to say that. Yeah, we get a lot of thank you letters. But yeah, people send us a lot of stuff like that. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty wild. I don't even know what to do with it. I read it sometimes and talk to people that are part of the program that they're thankful for about the letter or the note or the message on Facebook or whatever. And I don't know what else to do with it from there.
Yeah.
Store it up and hold on to it and recall it on a tough day.
Yeah, keep that in there's 2 folders. One of all your hate mail, which is slightly thicker, and then one of all the nice things.
Yeah, we don't wait. It's like for every one of those that comes in, there's 10 hate letters. So it's an okay ratio,
And just depending how you want to be motivated, which folder you